It is 3:14 in the morning. I am looking at myself in a mirror that has watched my mother dress me, my aunts dress me, and tonight is watching me dress myself for the last time as a daughter of this house. The kohl my grandmother applied to my eyes when I was 7 days old has been on me, in some form, every day of my life. My mother reapplied it 3 hours ago. She used the silver applicator that belonged to her mother, and her mother before her. A tool no longer than my index finger. The handle worn smooth where 4 generations of thumbs have pressed. The tip still shaped to a fine point that my great-grandmother apparently never replaced in 40 years of use. My mother said tomorrow I will be a married woman, and married women must look strong. The kohl is running now. It is running because I am crying. And I am crying because for the first time in 22 years, when I closed my eyes a few minutes ago to make my final dua before the ceremony, the face I saw on the other side of the darkness was not the face I was raised to expect. My name is HANYA. It means guide. My father named me that because I was the first child born after 3 years of prayers for a child. And he said the name was a promise, that I would guide my family toward righteousness, that I would be the one who walked correctly so that others could follow. I have spent 22 years trying to be that name. If my brother finds this recording, by sunrise tomorrow, I will be dead. But before I am buried, I need someone to know what happened in this room tonight. I should start where everything starts. I should start at the beginning. I was born in a stone house my great-grandfather built with his own hands in the year the first well in our valley ran dry. A fact my uncle recited every time he wanted to remind us that suffering was the foundation of the family's strength. The house has thick walls of pale limestone, 2 handspans across, which keep it cool in summer and hold the cold in winter like a held breath. 7 women were in that house when I came into the world. My mother, my father's 2 sisters, his mother, and 3 cousins who had come for the olive harvest and stayed on because my mother's labor started 3 weeks early and no one wanted to leave her alone. The first thing I remember is the smell of cardamom on my grandmother's hands. The second thing I remember is her thumb, dipped in kohl, drawing the line beneath my left eye on a Friday morning before the men returned from the mosque. She did this every Friday. Every Friday of my childhood, before the sound of returning footsteps reached the courtyard. My grandmother would sit me down on the low wooden stool near the east window and apply the kohl with her own hands. She made the formula herself. Antimony powder, from a block she kept wrapped in cotton, in the cedar chest beside her bed, mixed with a small measure of sheep's fat, rendered at a low flame, until it was soft enough to hold its shape when cooled. The cedar chest was very old. It had brass fittings that had gone green at the edges, and it smelled of camphor and old wool, and I was not allowed to open it without asking. My grandmother would heat the tip of the silver applicator over a small candle. 4 seconds exactly, she said, no more, or the metal holds too much heat. And then, when it cooled to the right temperature, which she judged with the inside of her wrist in the way she also tested bath water for infants, she would draw the line. She said the line would close my eyes to envy. She said envy was the only enemy that could enter a girl through her own face. She said this to me so many times that I learned the rhythm of it, the way I learned the rhythm of the Fatiha. Not as words first, but as a sound, a pattern. Something that belonged to the inside of the house, the way the smell of cumin belonged to the kitchen, and the sound of water in the clay jug belonged to the prayer room. I believed her. I believed her until I was 22 years old. My father was a merchant who sold dried goods, lentils, fava beans, sumac, the dried herbs that women came from 3 villages away to buy, because he sourced them from a man further east whose land produced varieties no one else had. He was respected in the way men in our village were respected, quietly, at a distance, with a slight lowering of the voice that told you the person speaking was careful with what they said around him. He prayed 5 times a day, with the precision of a man who had never once considered whether God was listening. Not because he doubted, but because the question itself would have struck him as irreverent, the kind of thing that weak-faithed people asked. He followed the Hanbali school in all things. He did not permit music in the house except the recitation of Quran, which he did not consider music. He did not permit the girls to attend school past the age of 14, which was the age at which he said, a girl's education becomes a matter for her husband, not her father. He was not cruel. I want to say that plainly, because the truth is more complicated than cruelty. He was not cruel, he was certain, and certainty, when it is total, becomes a kind of wall that no one on the inside can see, because it looks, from the inside, like the shape of the world. My uncle, my father's older brother, whose name I will not use here, was the one who arranged the marriage. He was a man who had never smiled in my presence, not once in 22 years. And I do not say this for effect. I am simply reporting a fact I noticed when I was perhaps 8 years old, and have verified in every memory I carry of him since. The face is still, the eyes assess, the hands are always folded. He had arranged marriages for 4 girls in our extended family before mine. All of them had been, by the family's accounting, successful arrangements. None of the girls had been asked. The idea of asking would not have occurred to anyone, including, I think, the girls themselves. We did not have the language for a different kind of arrangement. The language that would have allowed a girl to say no was simply not part of what we had been given. My mother was different from my father in the way that water is different from stone. Not in opposition, but in kind. She bent. She moved around things. She found the paths between fixed objects. She loved me in the way she had been taught to love, which was through service and maintenance. Keeping the coal fresh, making sure my clothes were clean and pressed for the mosque visits, sitting beside me when I was sick with a damp cloth and a low voice that said words I cannot remember, but whose sound I still carry somewhere behind my sternum. She did not question my father. I do not think she had ever once, in 24 years of marriage, said the words, "I disagree," or "that is wrong," or "I want something different." The closest she came, in my memory, was silence. A particular quality of silence that fell over her sometimes, when my father announced something. A silence that lasted 3 or 4 seconds longer than necessary before she replied. That silence was the only rebellion she had ever permitted herself. I learned to read it the way I learned to read the weather by the color of the sky at the edge of the valley. The coal was hers now. Since my grandmother died, 11 years before the night I am describing in the spring, from a fever that the village doctor said was her heart. My mother had taken over the Friday ritual. She used the same silver applicator. She kept it in the same cotton wrapping inside the cedar chest, which was now hers. She did not heat the tip the same way my grandmother did. She used a match instead of a candle, and she was less precise about the cooling time. But the line she drew was recognizably the line my grandmother had drawn, and the words she said were my grandmother's words. "This will close your eyes to envy. This is the only enemy that enters a girl through her own face." The applicator is on the edge of the mirror right now. She left it here 3 hours ago. I have not moved it. I have been sitting in this chair for a long time, looking at myself in this mirror and looking at the silver handle beside my reflection. And the coal she applied so carefully 3 hours ago has run entirely down my cheeks, and I look like a woman who has been crying for a very long time. I look like a woman who has been crying for 13 months, if I am being exact, because that is how long this has taken. 13 months ago, in the month of October, the seamstress my mother hired to repair the wedding clothes, she was already quietly beginning to prepare. A woman who came from 2 villages over, a refugee who had arrived in our valley 4 years earlier and taken up work as a seamstress because her family had left everything when they came. This woman returned to our house a sack of flour she had borrowed the week before. The sack was empty and folded flat, and tucked inside the fold, pressed into the inner seam with care, was a single sheet of paper, small, folded into fourths, dense with handwriting, Arabic letters, careful, the hand of someone who had copied these words deliberately, taking time with each one. I found it because I was the one who came to the door when the seamstress knocked. My mother was at the back of the house. I took the sack, and as I unfolded it to shake it flat before putting it away, the paper fell onto the stone floor of the entrance hall. I picked it up. I looked at it for 2 seconds, which is exactly how long it took me to understand what I was holding. Then I heard my mother's footsteps, and I put the paper into the fold of my clothing against my side, where I held it with my arm until I could get to my room. That night, alone, I unfolded it fully and read it by the light of the small lamp I kept for reading Quran in the evenings. It was not Quran. The words were familiar, in the way that things you have never seen can still feel familiar. The cadence of something old, the weight of language that had been spoken aloud many times. The words spoke of a God who called his people by name, who said, "Do not be afraid, I have redeemed you. I have called you by name, you are mine." And then, further down the page, words I had to read 3 times before I allowed myself to believe I had understood them correctly. "I am the way, and the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." I sat with that paper for 1 hour without moving. Then I folded it back into fourths, went to the garden wall, where there was a crack between 2 stones at knee height that I had known about since I was a child, because I used to hide small treasures there. A colored bead, a coin, once a dried flower from the field at the edge of the village. And I pressed the paper into the crack and covered it with a small flat stone. Then I went back inside and made my ablutions and prayed the Isha as I always did, in the correct sequence, in the correct direction, with the correct words. My hands did not shake. My voice did not change. I was very good by then, at performing a self I was not entirely sure was still the true one. That night, I dreamed of the seamstress. She was standing in the entrance hall of our house holding the flour sack, but in the dream, she was lit in a way that had no source. Not from a lamp, not from the door behind her, but from the air around her, and she was smiling at me, in a way I cannot fully describe, except to say it was the smile of someone who has been waiting patiently for a very long time, and is not surprised to have been right. I woke at 4:20 in the morning with the sound of the Fajr Azan from the mosque at the center of the village drifting through the high window above my bed, and I lay there listening to the words I had heard every morning of my life. That prayer is better than sleep. Come to prayer. Come to salvation. And I thought, what if salvation does not mean what I was told it means? I returned to that paper 11 more times over the following months. I had memorized it entirely by the end of the second month, which meant I no longer needed to go to the garden wall, which was good because in December, my father set my youngest brother to helping him in the garden on evenings and weekends, and the wall was no longer as accessible as it had been. By February, I was carrying the words inside me in the way I carried the Fatiha and the throne verse. Not as ideas to consider, but as a presence, a texture in the fabric of daily life. I could not have told anyone what I believed about these words. I would not have known how to form the sentence, but I knew that they had entered me at a depth that no previous reading had reached, and that something in me was responding to them with a hunger I did not have the vocabulary to describe. This was the same winter in which my father and my uncle began to speak, at dinner, about the son of my father's cousin in the village 2 days' journey east. He was a good man, they said, a devout man. He had his own house, built on land that had been his grandfather's land. He had asked, through proper channels, for a suitable wife, and my uncle had considered the matter and had decided that I was suitable. My father nodded. My mother said nothing for exactly 4 seconds, then said, God willing, it will be a blessing. I was not in the room for this conversation. My younger sister told me about it the next morning, while we were grinding spices in the kitchen. She said, they are going to give you to Karim. I said, I know. She said, are you afraid? I said, no. I was lying. But I had been lying about what was inside me for so long by then, that the lie came easily, the way a river finds the path it has cut 1,000 times before. The months between February and September were months of escalation. My uncle visited 3 times. Each visit, he sat with my father in the front room and spoke in a voice low enough that I could not hear the words through the wall, but loud enough that I could hear the rhythm of a negotiation being finalized. The second visit, he brought my father a document. I saw it from the doorway, folded in thirds, official looking, with a stamp at the top. I did not see what the stamp said. The third visit, my uncle looked at me as I served the tea, and his assessment was so open, so unapologetic in its appraising directness, that I had to set the tea tray down quickly on the low table so he could not see my hands. The wedding date was set in September, 23 days away. My mother began clearing my room of my childhood things. The books I had kept, the small shelves of objects I had gathered over 22 years, the embroidered pillow my grandmother had made me the year before she died. She did this with care, wrapping each thing, boxing the books, behaving with the quiet efficiency of someone dismantling a life they are sure will be replaced by a better one. I watched her do this for 2 evenings, before I said anything. On the 3rd evening, I sat down on the floor beside her and said, I am not ready. She stopped wrapping. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, no woman is ready. That is not what ready means. I did not say anything else. I did not know how to say the next thing, which was not about readiness at all. 1 week before the wedding, my father dismissed the seamstress. He said he had heard from a man in the village that she was known to keep company with people of uncertain faith. He used the word uncertain, the way he used words that were doing more work than they appeared to be doing, carefully, deliberately, not looking at me when he said it. She left that same afternoon. I did not see her go. By the time I understood what had happened, she was already 2 hours down the road. I never saw her again. I do not know what became of her. I have prayed for her every day for 8 years, and I believe with the confidence of someone who has come to understand something about how these things work, that God has not lost track of her. 4 days before the wedding, I went to the garden wall at dusk and retrieved the paper from the crack. It had been there 11 months. It was slightly damp at one edge from the winter rains, but otherwise intact. I held it in my hands in the fading light and read it one more time, even though I knew every word of it, because I wanted to hold the physical thing one last time. Then I replaced it, covered it with the flat stone, and went back inside. I needed to know it was still there. I do not know exactly why. Perhaps because it was the only evidence that any of this had been real, that the seamstress had existed, that the paper had existed, that I had read words that had changed something inside me in a way I was still struggling to name. I was not yet what I would become. I was still, in most of my visible life, a daughter who was obedient, a young woman who prayed correctly, and covered correctly, and spoke carefully, and did what was required of her. But the inside of me had been quietly rearranged, the way a room looks the same from the outside when someone has moved all the furniture in the dark. The night before the wedding, the women came. They arrived at 7 in the evening, 12 of them, the aunts and cousins and neighbors who constituted the female architecture of an occasion like this, and the house filled with a noise that was specific to celebrations. Overlapping voices, the smell of rosewater and oud wood, and the particular sweetness of marmoul being passed on a platter. Someone's child running in the corridor and being caught and quieted. My mother moved through all of it with the competence of a woman who has organized her life around these rituals. She knew who should stand where, who needed tea, whose opinion on the wedding garments needed to be solicited, and in what order. I moved through it too. I received the kisses on both cheeks. I accepted the words of blessing. I sat for the henna artist, a woman my mother had hired from the neighboring valley, old, with hands that did not tremble despite their age, who applied the mendi patterns in silence, which I was grateful for. At 11 o'clock at night, my mother sat beside me in the front room where the women had gathered, and she took the silver applicator from the cotton cloth where she had wrapped it, and she heated the tip over the lamp flame, and she counted 6, 7, 8, 9 seconds, longer than my grandmother's 4, because she always ran it a little hot. And she drew the coal beneath my eyes with the steadiness of a woman who had done this hundreds of times and intended to do it hundreds more. She said, as she always said, "This will keep you safe from the eye of envy." She said it quietly, not for the room, for me. And I sat very still, because I knew that this was the last time she would do this for me in this house, and I wanted to be present for it, in a way I had not always been present for the ordinary things of my life, in the way you want to be present for things when you sense they are about to become memories. By 1 in the morning, the women had gone. My mother, my father, my brothers were asleep, or at least in their rooms. I was alone in the room that had been prepared for me, the bridal room, which was really just the best room in the house, the one with the large mirror and the chest where the wedding garments were stored, temporarily rearranged and decorated for the occasion with fabric my aunt had brought from the city. I sat down in front of the mirror. I looked at myself. The coal was perfect. My mother's line was always cleaner than my grandmother's, technically speaking, and I looked like a bride, which is to say, I looked like a performance of a self that had been prepared by many hands for an occasion I had not chosen. I closed my eyes to make my final dua, the last prayer of a daughter of this house, before the ceremony would transform me into something the family considered a different category of person. I began to pray. I used the words I had been given, the formal Arabic, the correct forms, the supplications for blessing and guidance and protection that I had memorized when I was 7 years old and rehearsed 5 times a day in various combinations for 15 years. I was perhaps 30 seconds into the prayer when the words began to feel like objects in my mouth that I was moving around without understanding their shape. I stopped. I started again. The words came out in the correct sequence, but something had shifted in the space of the room. Not the temperature, not the light, but some quality of the silence, as though the air itself had become attentive. I stopped praying. I let the words fall silent. And in the silence, I said, not in Arabic, not in the formal language of prayer, but in the dialect of my own village, the words I would have used to speak to someone in the room. I said, I don't know what I am supposed to do. I said, I have read the words on that paper more than 100 times, and I still don't know what I am supposed to do. I said, if there is someone who hears this, I need you to tell me. I don't know how long I sat in that silence. I know that when it broke, It broke not with a sound, but with a change in the quality of the darkness behind my closed eyes. A warmth entering it, not like firelight, not diffuse but directed, the way you can feel sunlight on your face before you have opened your eyes to confirm the sun is there. I kept my eyes closed. I felt my breathing slow, without choosing to slow it. And then I heard my name. Not shouted, not loud. The way someone says your name when they have entered a room and want you to know they are there, when there is no urgency, when they are simply announcing their presence to someone they know well. I opened my eyes. The room was as it had been, the mirror, the lamp, the wedding garments on the chest. But there was light in the corner near the door. Not the light of a lamp or the moonlight from the window, which was a thin crescent that night and gave almost nothing, but a light that was present the way a person is present, that had a quality of attention to it, that seemed to be oriented toward me in the way that light from a source is oriented. Except the source was not a thing, but an arrangement of the air itself around a figure that I can only describe as standing, as contained, as knowing exactly where it was, and having decided to be there. He did not come closer at first. He stood near the door, and I looked at him, and my heart was doing something that was not fear. I want to be precise about this because I know what fear feels like in my body, and this was not it. This was a stillness that was its own kind of sensation. Like the moment before something immensely significant is spoken. Like the quality of silence in the room when my grandmother was about to tell me something she considered important. Then he moved closer, not walking exactly, present nearer, in the way that the significance of something becomes present to you as you continue to hold it. He was close enough that I could see his hands, and his hands were marked. I saw the marks, and I knew what they were, and the knowing arrived in me not as information, but as recognition. The way you recognize someone you have not yet met, but have always known you would. He lifted his hand and touched the corner of my left eye, where the coal had run. A single touch, the pad of his finger, gentle as my grandmother's thumb on a Friday morning. And he said, "They marked you for protection. I marked you for purpose. The mark they gave you can wash away. The mark I leave does not." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "The paper your neighbor gave you. I wrote those words for you. Every night you read them in the dark. I was in the dark with you. Then, you are mine, Hadia, not his, mine. You have known this for 13 months. Tonight is the night you know it with your whole body." I asked, not aloud, because I could not form a sound in my throat, but in the interior way you speak when the room is too full of something for the body's ordinary machinery to function. I asked, "What do I do? What happens now?" He said, "You already know." And he said, "I will not leave you. In the room you go to after this. In the road you take after that. In the years that come after the road. I will not leave you." Then the light receded. Not suddenly, gradually, the way the warmth of sunlight recedes when a cloud passes across it. And you are not alarmed because you understand that the sun is still there, simply temporarily unavailable to your skin. The corner near the door was ordinary again. The lamp was as it had been. The wedding garments were still on the chest. The silver applicator was still on the edge of the mirror where my mother had left it. I sat very still for what I think was another hour, though I did not look at the clock again after 3:14. I was not afraid. I was not, in any ordinary sense, calm. I was something for which I did not then have a word, and for which I am still not sure there is an adequate one in any language I speak. A condition of being entirely certain and entirely without a plan, of knowing the truth of something with absolute clarity, while having no idea whatsoever of the mechanics of living inside that truth. I held the silver applicator in both hands. I turned it over. I looked at the worn place on the handle where my grandmother's thumb had pressed, where my mother's thumb had pressed, where my thumb had pressed in my childhood when I was allowed to hold it as a treat, while my grandmother applied the coal. 4 generations of thumbs, 80 years of Friday mornings, protection from the eye of envy. I set it back down on the edge of the mirror. I did not apply the coal. Dawn came into the room from the high window gradually, the way all real changes come. Not as a single moment, but as an accumulation of increments. The darkness becoming gray, and the gray becoming pale, and the pale becoming the particular blue-white of early morning in a stone house that faces east. I heard the sound of my mother moving in the kitchen, which meant it was past 5. I heard my aunt's voice. She had stayed the night, and the sound of other women beginning to arrive, because the women came early on the morning of a wedding to help with the preparations. I stood up from the chair. I looked at myself in the mirror one last time. The coal was still there, still running from the night before, in the tracks it had made during the hours of weeping, and I had not reapplied it. My face looked like a face that had been through something. That was an accurate description. I walked to the door and opened it, and went out into the corridor of my father's house. My aunt Sabiha was the first person I saw. She looked at my face, at the absence of fresh coal, at the tracks of what had run in the night. And her expression moved through 3 stages rapidly: surprise, confusion, something that might have been the beginning of pity. She said, "Come back in. Let me fix your face before your father sees you." I said, "I am not going to put the coal back on." She said, "What?" I said, "I need to speak to my father." She said, "You cannot go to your father looking like this, not today." I said, "I need to speak to my father." My father was in the courtyard. He was dressed for the occasion, his good robe, the one he wore only for Eid and significant family events. And he was speaking to my uncle, who had arrived and was standing with his usual stillness in the shade of the fig tree at the center of the courtyard. 3 of my brothers were there, several male cousins, neighbors who had come early to be part of the procession. I walked into the courtyard, and I stood in a place where I could be seen, and I said, in a voice that was steady, to my father, "I cannot marry Kareem. I have met someone. I need to tell you about what happened to me." The courtyard went quiet in the way that spaces go quiet when something is said that rearranges the air. My father looked at me. His face did not, at first, change. My uncle did not move. Then my father's face changed, not into anger, not immediately, but into a kind of focused attention that was, in its way, more frightening than anger, because it was the face of a man calculating. He looked at me, and then he looked at the people around us, the cousins, the neighbors, 3 women who had come from the adjacent house and were standing at the gate. And he looked at my uncle, and my uncle made the smallest possible movement with his head. Not yet, not here. My father stepped forward and took my arm, not roughly, but firmly, the grip of a man escorting someone who is about to fall, rather than the grip of a man punishing someone who has spoken. He said quietly, "Come inside." I went inside. My aunt went with us. My uncle came last, pulling the door to the courtyard closed behind him. What followed was a conversation I will not detail in full, because some of what was said in that room belongs only to the inside of that room and to God and to me. What I will say is that the words I used were my words. Not the words from the paper, not the words from any script I had rehearsed, but the plain words of a woman describing what had happened to her in the most straightforward terms she had available. I said, "Something happened to me last night." I said, "Someone came to me and spoke to me, and I believe it was Isa." I said, "I have been reading about him for more than a year, and I believe he is who he says he is." I said, "I am not able to stand before God today and speak the words of a ceremony I do not believe will be blessed." My uncle said nothing throughout this. My aunt left the room partway through. My father spoke once, very quietly, at the end. He said, "I do not recognize the person standing in front of me." Then he stood and left the room, and my uncle followed him. The door was closed. I heard from outside the sound of the bolt being drawn. I sat down on the floor. The room was small. My father's study, 3 paces by 4 paces, bookshelves, prayer rug, the desk where he kept his accounts. I could hear, through the wall, the sound of the celebration outside continuing. The women's voices in the house, the men's voices in the courtyard, someone arriving with a goat for the feast. Life continuing in the shape that had been arranged for it, indifferent to what had just been said in a small room by a woman it had not asked. I was not afraid. I want to say that again because it is the thing that still surprises me when I look back. I was not afraid. I was contained in something that I did not choose and could not control. And I was fully aware of the range of what could happen to me in the hours and days ahead. And I was not afraid. I was something else, present, anchored, held. The word I use now, knowing what I know now, is held. I did not know that word yet in that room. Or rather, I knew it, but had not yet attached it to the sensation I was experiencing. But I was held. As simply and as literally as that. I was locked in that room for 3 days. The wedding did not happen. My uncle announced to the gathered guests a health situation. My mother, he said, had taken suddenly unwell in the morning, and the family had decided, with great regret, to postpone the ceremony. The guests left. The food was distributed to the neighbors, as is customary when a celebration is cancelled suddenly, and the food cannot be returned. The cousin from the village 2 days east, the man who was to have been my husband, was informed by messenger. I do not know what the message said. I was not consulted about the message. For 3 days, I sat in the study. My mother brought food twice a day without speaking. The second day, she brought it and I said, I am sorry for the pain I have caused you. She set the plate down and stood for a moment with her back to me and then left the room. On the morning of the third day, I heard her in the corridor outside the door, speaking in a very low voice to someone on the other side. Not my father's voice, not my uncle's. My youngest sister, Dima, who was 14 years old and who, 3 mornings earlier, I had pressed a folded paper into her hand when no one was watching, had whispered to me as I left for the courtyard. I will read it. I read it tonight. On the night of the third day, at a time I estimated to be past 2 in the morning, I heard the bolt drawn back very quietly on the outside of the door. The door opened. Dima was standing in the dark corridor with her shoes already on and a small bag of my things. How she had assembled it, when without being seen, I still do not fully understand, held against her side. She said nothing. She looked at me in the dark, and her face was the face of a person who has read something that has changed them, and she held out her hand, and I took it. We walked through the sleeping house and out through the kitchen door, which opens onto the back lane behind the houses, and we walked without speaking for 40 minutes through the village, and beyond it on the unpaved road that leads toward the valley. We walked for most of what remained of the night. At the first village we reached, a place I had been to only twice in my life, Dima stopped at the gate of a house, whose blue paint I recognized from something the seamstress had once said about a friend of hers who lived along this road. Dima knocked. A woman opened the door after 2 minutes. She looked at us. She asked no questions. She opened the door fully and stepped aside. I have been safe for 8 years. The road from that door to the life I have now is a road with many stations, a shelter in a town 2 days' walk from my village, a family who hid me for 6 weeks, a crossing to a city where there was a congregation that knew what to do with women who arrived with nothing, where the pastor's wife gave me clothes and food and a room, and eventually work teaching the children of refugees in a school. The congregation ran near the market. I have a name that is not entirely my name in this new place. I have documents that are real. I have a community of people who know the full version of my story and hold it with me. I have learned in 8 years to sleep through the night. I have learned to pray without the architecture of fear that prayer used to have around it. I have learned that held is a word for a condition that does not end when the locked room is unlocked. My father does not speak my name. I was told this by a man from my village who encountered someone from my community in a city neither of them was from, which is how these things travel in the world of people who have left the places they came from. My uncle, I was told, arranged the cousin's marriage to someone else within 6 months. My mother, I have no news of my mother. This is the thing I carry most. This is the weight that does not reduce with time. Dima is 19 now. She is still in the village. She sends messages through a channel of people that neither of us could fully map if asked to draw it. A chain of trust, mostly women, mostly those who have been the kind of silent that my mother was, the kind of silence that is not peace, but is not, quite, surrender. Dima's messages are careful, without details that would endanger anyone who passes them along. But in the last message, which arrived 7 months ago, she said, I have questions. I am trying to find the words for them. I said back, take your time. The words will come. I waited 22 years for mine. The silver applicator is still in my father's house, in the room where they prepared me for a ceremony that did not happen. On the edge of the mirror that watched my mother apply the kohl that I did not reapply, on the morning I walked into the courtyard and changed everything. I did not take it when Dima walked me through the house in the dark. I thought about it. For 1 second, standing in the doorway of the study, I thought about it. But I left it. The applicator belongs to that house the way the walls belong to that house, the way the cedar chest belongs to that house, the way the 4 generations of women who pressed their thumbs against its worn handle belong to that house. I left it there, the way you leave a part of your story in the place where it happened, because moving it would be a kind of lie, a pretense that you could carry the whole thing with you. Some things have to stay where they belong, in order for you to belong to the place you are going. I do not wear kohl anymore. Not from a rule, not from theology, not because anyone told me to stop. I stopped because I realized, slowly, across the years, that I no longer needed to mark my eyes against what entered me. My grandmother was right, that there is something that enters a girl through her own face. She was right about that. But the thing she named it as was the wrong thing. It is not envy, or rather, envy is only one variety of a much larger category, and the mark that protects against it is not antimony drawn on a line beneath the eye. I know what the protecting mark is now. I have known for 8 years. You cannot wash it off. You cannot smear it with tears. It does not run at 3:14 in the morning, when everything you are given is being taken away. If you are watching this, and you understand what I mean, if you are in a room right now that you did not choose, if you are carrying words inside you that you read in secret and have not yet been able to say aloud to anyone, if you are waiting for the moment that will tell you what to do, I want you to know that the moment will come. It will not look like what you expect. It will not arrive through the door you are watching, but it will come. And when it does, it will speak your name in the language of someone who has been waiting to say it for a very long time. Not the name they gave you for their purposes, your name. The one that was yours before any of them knew to name you. The coal is running down my face. It has been running since 3:14 in the morning, 8 years ago, in a room in my father's house, when someone touched the corner of my left eye and said, "The mark I leave does not wash away." It has not washed away.